Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Mountains We Climb. This is a series where we dive into people's journeys of overcoming challenges and adversity in their lives so that we can understand what is really possible and what it really takes. I'm your host, Jordan Kilpatrick-Smith, and in this week's episode, we're going to be exploring Maren and Matt's journey through the writing, directing, and producing of Keeper, as well as how their relationship played into their work dynamic throughout the project. Each episode is done live, so if you'd like to ask your own questions and be a part of our discussions, you can join us on YouTube and or Facebook. Marin and Matt, thank you for being here with me.
Yeah, we're so happy to be here.
So, Marin, going first, where does your story start?
Yeah, so, I guess my New York story, I went to school for acting here in New York, and that's where we met several years ago. Matt was running a theatrical production company, which he'll talk about. And I was like the college kid volunteering and so excited. And so I went through that schooling, graduated, and transitioned from acting to writing. So I was playwriting for a long time, and then kind of was losing my grip on what my voice was, what I wanted to write. So I ended up, after like a winter that was kind of rough, reaching out to Matt, being like, hey, do you have any creative projects going on? And he did, and so I came to a reading of his pilot script for a different project, and we just started working together because he responded to some of my feedback. So that's kind of how I got into working with you.
You're also a successful business owner.
Oh yeah, I own and run a dog walking company. So that was a lot of my years outside of school. I was focused on building this dog walking company that's based in Manhattan. So that's been a big part of my journey too.
Nice. So you were dog walking at the same time as developing this creative side.
Yeah. So I was balancing the dog walking business and my writing career journey, what I wanted to do with my life. And then we kind of clicked as co-developers, co-writers.
Nice. Thank you. And Matt, where do you start?
I start in Sacramento, California. It's where I was born and raised, and I always wanted to be an actor growing up. Went to school in Southern California at Cal Arts. I came out to New York, toured the country for a couple of years doing some classical theater. Did a bit of regional theater around the country, and then formed a theater company called The Representatives, which Maren was referring to, where me and my collaborator at the time, Stan Richardson, who's a playwright, Stan would write original plays and we'd perform them in people's apartments, and we'd throw parties after every show because we had these wonderful, crazy people who would let us do this in their homes over and over and over again.
It was very cool.
And then, in that, I met Maren and a bunch of other really, really cool collaborators. And when that theater company ended, I was kind of searching for a creative outlet. And since I no longer had someone writing for me, I started experimenting with writing myself. And then, like Maren said, we kind of connected. And right off the bat, Maren would say things like, I'm not sure that this character would do that. Instead of being kind of offended by that, it was more of like, well, that's a much better idea about this character that I wrote, that I had. And so we began developing some scripts together and decided to make it official, and formed a production company, One-Eyed Rabbit, where we were specifically interested in telling stories either like from a different perspective than had normally been told, or giving voice to characters who are normally not seen on screen, or maybe playing with the structure of a story that's been told so it can be told in a different way. Because I would say like that's something that you added to my artistic identity, is this different perspective, different way of viewing and saying things.
Yeah, I think at first when you were writing, you were really focusing on what can I write for myself as an actor, and then I kind of came in and was like, okay, yeah, but like what's relevant? Like how can we make these other characters equally as interesting as
what's in it for other people?
Yeah.
Right. So Maren, am I understanding right that your main focus is or was writing, and Matt, your main focus is or was acting?
Yeah.
Right. And then you guys combined the two. And now that you guys are working together, One-Eyed Rabbit, what are your respective roles in that company? What do you both take on the majority of the work for?
Yeah. So in the developing, as far as like writing a script, Matt's kind of the idea man. And so he is constantly brainstorming, coming up with ideas. So then he'll come to me in the morning while I'm asleep and haven't had anything.
We're also a romantic couple, just in case. We are workaholics, but we're not that much of workaholics. No, but it's true. I am a bit of a morning person, and so Maren will be asleep with our dog Odin, who is asleep right here, and it'll be like, I don't know, 7:30, and I'll be like, Maren,
I had this idea.
And she'll be like, okay, don't give me a play-by-play. Go write the first couple of pages. Give it to me. Let me see what I relate to, and we'll go from there.
I make him schedule meetings so that we can develop it when I'm in the right headspace. But yeah, I think I'm like a co-developer. I feel like you bring the idea and then I flesh it out, make it more specific, hone in on the characters with you.
You're also the first audience member, because honestly, that's one of the main things that I feel like that we do for each other is I may be incredibly passionate about this idea, but if I see on Maren's face, she's like, interesting. Okay. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's maybe not the idea for both of us to work on it, even though the idea might start with something in my brain. It has to be something that we both really connect to, we're both passionate about. I mean, literally yesterday, I pitched you the idea for this pilot of a TV show, and you're like, yes, but what if this happened too? And I'm like, well, there it is. There's the show.
Nice.
So often we'll kind of stumble upon things that we want to work on through this back and forth of exchanging ideas, and really the idea that the both of us are really passionate about is the one that kind of wins and moves forward. And then in all of our One Eyed Rabbit projects, you will probably direct. I will probably have a role as an actor in it. And either I will write and we will co-develop, or we will co-write it together. And then at least for now, we are both doing some heavy lifting with the producing of it as well, out of necessity, because there are two of us.
Yeah. So what is the current project that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so we just wrapped production on Keeper, which is a short film that Matt wrote that we co-developed. Do you want to talk about?
Sure.
Can you start right from the beginning, like the idea of Keeper? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
I want to know all the details.
Well, the idea was we were developing a bunch of scripts, and we had this kind of like a interactive detective dramedy that we were pitching to these different platforms and networks, and these kind of like long-term ideas and
things that we couldn't make ourselves, like things that we would have to get a production company or a network to give us money to make, and that's just going to take years for some of these projects.
As a performer, I was really itching to start acting again, and so Maren said, well, why don't you write something small that you can be in, and we'll produce that as we're doing these long-term things. And so I said, okay. And so there was a mutual friend of ours, Chris Harrell. Did you say write something?
Yeah,
I
said write something for you and Chris. Well, because Chris had it at the time when we thought this was going to be a much smaller scale project. I was like, Chris has a camera. Write something for him, and we can use his camera. And it became much bigger than just using a friend's camera.
I mean, we're a rather young production company, but that is our story thus far. Let's do this thing that explodes into this thing. So one of the most exciting things when writing for people is I know I'm going to be in it, the actor, and I think, what could our relationship be? Are we boss and coworker? Are we, I don't know, colleagues at something? Are we family members? And I started to get interested in the idea of Chris and I being brothers. And something that really spurred my writing is my father had passed away about 2.5 years ago. And so that's just a really big perspective shifter when something as monumental as that happens, and you say, oh, what's important to me? What do I actually want to be doing? And so I started putting my energy into writing, and Dad ended up influencing everything, whether it was directly about someone losing someone or whether that was just in the background. I kind of knew the story was going to be about that. And so I also have a brother named Aaron who lives with schizoid affective disorder. And that was kind of a big part of us growing up. Aaron, who's the toughest person I know, kind of finding his way through that disorder, that influencing him and my father's relationship. They had an insanely close, intimate, complex, ultimately loving, but sometimes butting heads relationship. And I would be a witness to that, be involved in that. So I was really interested in this kind of complex relationship between someone dealing with either a mental illness or a disability of some sort and overcoming that, and then their caretaker or their aide or someone who is in their corner kind of helping them through that. And so when my father passed away, one of the questions I asked myself is like, how is this going to affect my relationship with my brother? what is my responsibility to him? What is our responsibility to each other? And how is this loss of this father figure going to affect our relationship with each other? And so that was kind of the seed of Keeper, which ended up becoming the story about these two adult brothers who are now orphaned, and this tragic accident that happens that leaves one of them with locked-in syndrome and forces the other one, the older brother, who I played, to become the young one's caretaker. And kind of this the journey that the two of them go through after this accident, how the accident changes their relationship, both physically, emotionally, and kind of over the years, how they both find a way to take care of each other and affect each other in a positive way, despite their incredibly changed physical and daily dynamic.
Yeah, that's
the long-winded version.
Well, that's incredible. Sid says you guys are an awesome, down-to-earth couple. Jake's here with us. Jake says, hi, guys. So for the people who are listening who don't know what locked-in syndrome is, could you give us a quick rundown?
Whoa, Jake's listening, so you're on the spot.
Yeah.
Jacob, by the way, is our story consultant, who, I'll just say a little something and pass it over to you. At first we knew that we wanted one of the characters after an accident to be physically disabled. We weren't sure exactly what that was, but as we co-developed it together, you had some experience with writing and developing things about locked-in syndrome, and so we kind of settled on locked-in syndrome, which you will talk about in a moment. And so we needed to reach out to someone who has an experience recovering from locked-in syndrome, which is incredibly rare. So we set ourselves like a pretty high bar. We're like, who are we going to find who can aid us in this journey? And I stumbled upon this blog post by this man named Jacob Handel, who's recovering from locked-in syndrome, and it just clicked right away. The way he was writing his blogs was the way our characters were speaking. And so I sent him a note, and we kind of hit it off. But I'll pause so you can talk about locked-in syndrome. Elaborate on Jacob.
The quick rundown I usually give for locked-in syndrome is when someone is entirely paralyzed, has no autonomous function of their body, but is entirely conscious. There's no damage to how their brain is processing. They're there, they're hearing, they're seeing everything, but they can't move a muscle. So it's a lot to process for able-bodied people, just imagining being totally aware of everything around you and absolutely unable to make your body function the way you want to.
Yeah.
I feel like a cultural reference that folks might know is the novel, which was turned into a movie, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To deal with.
Can you say that again?
The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so this is my understanding of locked-in syndrome. This might be wrong. Please correct me. But a lot of the time, the medical staff and the family don't know that the person is actually in there. They think that they're just in a vegetative state, right?
Yeah. A lot of the times it's mistaken. And so that's part of why it's such a traumatic disability to have, because it's the most misunderstood you could possibly be. Like, you have your family and your friends and your loved ones looking at you like, what a shame, they're just not in there. And you hear them and you see them and you can't communicate that you're in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like one of the ways we kind of got to locked-in syndrome, like I said, we knew we needed one brother to be the caretaker for the other. And we were trying to discover exactly why that is and how that happened. And although this film is not autobiographical, it isn't necessarily about me and my brother in our situation. There are autobiographical elements to everything that I write, so things are inspired. They may start with an experience I had and then turn into this fictional version of it. And my father was a bodybuilder and a personal trainer. My uncle was a bodybuilder. My grandfather and great-grandfather were boxers. So I come from a very physical family where like kind of strength and masculinity are a really big thing. So I knew I wanted that to be the case with these brothers too, that in the past, them being very physical was a thing. So I was trying to think of how do we take away one of the ways they connected in the past.
Right.
That way they have to connect in a different way in the future. And what locked-in syndrome also offered is a way to take away the power of speech too. So they have physicality and speech taken away from each other. So how do these two brothers who related to each other first and foremost physically and then verbally, how do they connect and develop when those two main tools are taken away from them?
That's incredible. What was the biggest challenge in writing a script like this? Because I can't imagine that's an easy undertaking.
Well, I've never had locked-in syndrome. I mean, that was one of the biggest challenges was kind of, I don't know if courage is the word, having the courage, ignorance, and honestly kind of privilege to say, I think I can write this story and write a version and have Maren go, I like this and this, I don't know if this is the version. And then as we developed it, kind of having people offer things here and there, we actually had a potential collaborators say in a very nice way, I really like the script, but I have a family member who is disabled and I don't think the state that your script in gives the full humanity to the character of Caleb, who didn't have locked-in syndrome at the time, but was quadriplegic.
In the script.
And that was really tough to hear. Like, oh, wow, this is really bumping someone. We took a moment, we took that in, we went away and said, how do we take this as a charge to actually make this a script that does give the full humanity to both of the characters and does allow as many people in as possible? And assistant director on it, who's basically a co-producer as well, said, you should probably reach out to someone who's actually been experiencing this thing that you want to write about.
Yeah.
That's how we reached out to Jacob.
I think what I experienced in because although we co-developed it, Matt was the one going away and typing on the keyboard and really writing it. And what I experienced as your journey with the script was, how it went, as most scripts do, they start quite personal. And then as the story takes a life of its own, it becomes something else. And so you're reckoning with, where you started and where it is now. It started, with the character Mark that Matt was playing, operating in a place of like fear and resentment. Mm-hmm. And by the end, the script was really about like the love and care between these two brothers and how these two brothers care for each other. And what I think was so remarkable in our process is how, despite how personal this story was when you started it, how open we were to collaborators who had something to say. So even the prospective collaborator who decided not to work with us, who had some criticisms of it, we took that in. We didn't say like, well, they don't understand. We were like, no, we have to listen. And then also Jacob was huge in helping us understand what it's like to be locked in. And so that influenced a lot of how we wrote the script, how we portrayed the character of Caleb, what the actions were between these two brothers in their present day.
I think what Jacob did, one of the many things that Jacob did is helped us give the character of Caleb agency, because it is told from the perspective of the older brother who is the caretaker, because that is an experience that feels a little more authentic to myself and my family situation. But we still wanted to make sure that each character was three-dimensional. And like you said, one of the biggest things with locked-in syndrome is the lack of agency that this human being has and is perceived to have. And so we really did need to talk to someone who's been through that experience to figure out, where does that agency come from? When do you get frustrated? What do you laugh at? What amazes you in a moment? Because most folks with locked-in syndrome don't have the ability to articulate that experience. But Jacob, and as you know, because you've spoken with him, and maybe listeners or viewers who heard that.
Episode 8, by the way.
It has an incredible story of recovering from this disorder that is incredibly rare to recover from. So he just had so many insights, and also would say, side note, wouldn't it be cool if, which was really helpful too.
Yeah.
I don't want to pass over because I can kind of speed through things. Your entrance into it, maybe with your mom and Chris and his friend. So we all kind of had ways into the subjects of caretaking or disability or overcoming physical challenges. I don't know how much of that.
Yeah. So I just have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you're writing and then you hand it to someone and you say, hey, I'd like you to collaborate with this. And then they have criticism and they, for whatever reason, decide not to do it, right? So here you are, you put tons of hours, you put all of like yourself, your soul into this, and you hand it to someone and then they turn away from it. Now, you guys seem to have an incredibly positive attitude about this, right? But was it always that way? Did you always come at it from that perspective, or were there times where someone would provide you criticism and it really hit personally?
It's hard to get criticism on something you've written, period. Like even between us and even when we're in the middle of developing something together and it's already our co-work, like it's really hard to like put your thoughts and ideas out there and have someone be like, no, that's not quite it. I think you've gotten a lot better about that. You particularly had a hard time with that when you first started writing because Matt writes from such a personal, intimate place, more than most writers I know, and it's quite remarkable. So when he gets criticism, it's like really hard to process because he's so in it. He's so like myopic as far as the story and the characters. But I know we as a couple have worked on that, like as a co-creators have worked on how we give criticism. Part of being in a partnership, any partnership, romantic, professional, creative, is learning how to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that we've really done over our collaboration.
Absolutely. And the short answer is, yes, it's hard all the time, and I absolutely take it personally at first because it's a really personal story, all of them, like Marin said. And yeah, just to be transparent, I joke that, when I give someone a draft of something, the only appropriate response is that they faint because it's so amazing. Like, that is secretly what I always want to happen. That they're like, how did you do this on the first draft? Amazing. Here's $1 million. Let's go make it. So no one ever says that, right? But that is what kind of like the little kid in me wants to happen. And thank God that never happens because the first draft is never as good as the second, third, or fourth. And just going back to that idea of perspectives, Marin always adds things to any project that we're working on that make it 100% better, as do when we bring in other collaborators. So like Chris, who was the other actor, had his own experience with friends who went through tragic accidents and were in a vegetative state. So his experience was really helpful. And I wanted to throw it back to you, talking about kind of personal connections you have to that, and Marin just kind of sharing her experiences inspire me to add things to stories. But yes, it's difficult.
Yeah. And I think something people who don't write scripts or go into production of films might not know is like, you're always working on the script up until the day you're filming. Like the script is not ever done until you just say it's done. It can always be finessed and tweaked. So you can always get feedback from someone that makes you like, oh, well, let me change this. So especially leading up to our second day of production and, getting information from Jacob, getting feedback from potential collaborators, we thought the script was done. That's why we were moving into production. But you're still getting this information, and thank God, because the script was so much better. Having been challenged in that way than it would have been if it had been done when we thought it was.
Something else, because I know, this is the mountains we climb, like challenges that we all face that may be applicable kind of across the board is I think something that helps me and us is remembering what the goal is to begin with. So as much as I want people to faint and say, you're amazing, that's not the goal of things. The goal is to remind people that they're not alone. I mean, that's where I write from. That's where I act from, because as an audience member, that's what often really moves me, is when I'm reminded in a funny way, in a sad way, in a dramatic way, that you're not alone in thinking this or feeling this. And so at each stage of the process, as tough as it was to hear feedback from Marin or other collaborators or people who chose not to be our collaborators, what I had to remind myself and what we had to remind ourselves is the ultimate goal is to create this story about this very specific relationship between these two brothers that as many people can relate to in a personal way as possible. And if that's the goal, then I do kind of have to put my ego aside. And we do have to find a way to communicate, to tell this very specific story.
The most universal way possible.
So I just want to throw this in quickly. Jake, one of the only survivors of locked-in syndrome who can talk and, actually communicate, he just sent us a message here saying, there's now research that shows 1 in 5 patients that are perceived to be in a vegetative state may be locked in. Just to put a number on it, there are roughly 40,000 people in persistent vegetative states.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many people. And that was part of why we ended up picking locked-in syndrome. My first play I ever wrote, my first thing I ever wrote was about locked in, and Chris Harrell, the other actor in Keeper, played the lead role in that in college because we went to college together. And it was about this character who was locked in and his family didn't know. So you saw his perspective, because in the theater you can do crazy things like that. And then, you know, the people around him thinking, you know, that he's not there and questioning, are we going to pull the plug, things like that. Because these are things that happen all the time to people. And so I think that applies to that statistic for sure.
Yeah. So in the writing process where you're really pouring yourself into this, you're showing up in a way understanding that the challenges that people provide for the script are actually there for the script. And as much as it might hurt, keeping the mind on the goal that, you know, we want to connect with people and show people that they're not alone here. And sometimes that means taking that criticism, right? So it's keeping a proper mindset there, saying, this is okay. This is part of the process. This pain that I'm experiencing is actually here to make it better. Is that right?
Yeah, well, like I said, I come from a very physical family, you know, who trains and works out a lot. And just this idea that in order to build muscle, you have to tear muscle, right? So you have to experience that well, ideally you're not experiencing pain as you're working out, but, you know, just the idea of needing to tear a muscle in order for it to repair and get bigger and stronger and stronger. I would say like an artistic process is similar. You have to be willing to be torn apart a little bit. And ideally, at least for me, I have a collaborator that's helping me put myself and the story back together in a stronger way. And the more people that are touching the story and kind of influencing the story, I think the potential for it to reach more people in a very personal way grows exponentially.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love that analogy. Just a quick sidetrack, and then we're going on in the story here, is Jake just wanted to clarify it's actually 40,000 in the US alone.
What?
Yeah, we're not talking about the whole world there. That's 40,000 people in persistent vegetative states in the United States.
And a quarter of them could be locked
up
in.
to 1 in 5.
1 in 5.
About 20%, yeah.
So, something I also want to say about Jake, I don't know, because we didn't get a chance to listen to your episode with him yet. He's also very funny. And I don't know if folks would assume that from, you know, what we're talking about. But that was one of the things that really drew us to Jake, is these videos he made where you go in expecting one thing. You're like, man, I'm going to watch this guy recovering from locked-in syndrome. And you're like laughing your ass off because either something he said or did.
So charming. Like, we just always have smiles on our faces.
And that was also the tone we kind of needed for the film, too, because I don't know, the way we related to tragic accidents or caretaking is it's these highs and lows, right? It's not just these lows, but it's these moments that really bring folks together, these moments of unexpected hilarity that are coupled with these really kind of tragic and down moments. And just connecting with Jake reminded us, oh, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Big shout out to Jake here. Jake, I'm going to post all of Jake's contact stuff, his YouTube channel, all of that will be in the description as well. So everyone can go and check that out.
Definitely check out his blog.
So moving forward, you created the script, you go to production, you've somehow found and consulted with one of the only people in the world who you could have consulted with. Then what happens?
Yeah, so then there's a lot of logistics, which I think was the crash course we learned in indie filmmaking, because the film is self-financed and self-produced. So even though I really just want to direct, Matt really just wants to act the script that he's written, we have to get the logistics to happen. We have to hire the people. We have to figure out how to get them to the location. We have to figure out where the location is, what equipment we're renting, what people are going to eat on set. So there's just all these details that take forever to figure out.
Well, and as the director too, again, as producers, we're both working on things, but you had the final say in a lot of things because you needed to put together a team that you trusted, that excited you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that starts with, like the cinematographer.
Well, first we brought on Lauren, who was our AD and co-producer, who I'd collaborated with before, and she was a game changer for us because she's been on way more sets, way more productions than we have. And so she was able to really just cut out a lot of the time we would have spent being like, how do we do this? And she's just like, here's how you do it. So she was invaluable in that. And then, from there, finding artistic collaborators. Our DP Jody was, I think, the first person I reached out to and heard back from. And you want to vet a couple people just to make sure that you're going with the person that you think you'll collaborate with the best. But we just always were like, I think Jody is the one. Like, she's our dream team collaborator.
Well, also because Jody came back and was like, awesome, I really relate to this. And here are detailed points on how I would like to collaborate with you. And for a nerd like Marin, you were like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And so that you guys were kind of just like vibing off of each other. And Jody actually is one of the ones who said, she said something to the effect of, I really love in the script how actually there are moments that Caleb, who has locked-in syndrome, takes care of Mark.
And that totally changed your view on...
Well, I don't know that that was on purpose. Now that I'm conscious of that, let me go back into the script and find ways that actually...
That they both take care of each other. Yeah.
Nice. Now, I'm listening to you guys talking about this, and there's all these things you need to take care of, and it's really starting off with the two of you guys. How many times were there just moments of like overwhelm? Just pure, just like...
Oh my gosh, so many. So part of us being in a relationship as well, and one of the first concerns when we did start dating was like, what about our production company? What if something happened to our production company? This is so important to us. And we've had to find our way through some of these really frustrating moments as professional and creative collaborators. At first, when we were prepping for the first day of filming, I'm a very organized person. So I've got the Excel sheet ready. I've got everything like totally down lock. And so I was feeling like I was holding a lot because as the director, I was having the final say of like hiring a lot of people, what location I wanted to be. But then as a producer, I was then also doing a lot of that organization as well. And so we had a moment.
You're being nice. Marin said, gotta pick up the slack, bud. I'm doing so much work. I need you to do more work. And again, similar to getting a writing note, sometimes it's a little hard in the moment to hear because you're like, well, I guess I'm not doing that much. Well, it might be hard in the moment, but then realizing what's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is creating this story, maintaining a healthy personal relationship. So I got to pick up the slack.
What I think was what is wonderful about having these challenges as professional collaborators within our romantic relationship is that learning how to communicate through those misunderstandings only helps us in our personal and romantic life. Because we learn how to like sit down and just be like, I'm frustrated and I need to explain to you why without blaming you or putting you down. And we did figure that out through this film.
And that is the tone that we always use. You know, when someone else is using this tone, Marin, I would like to have a conversation right now. You're like, okay. Also, two things, just speaking of challenges and overcoming challenges, we kind of locked into all of these collaborators who I would say almost all of them were more experienced than us in filmmaking.
Totally.
And just went above and beyond in helping us figure out kind of producing the film in general, but also these very specific moments that they didn't mind, I don't know, being a teacher in a moment, which kind of like went beyond their specific role, but their willingness to collaborate really made things possible. And also just a compliment that I got to give to Marin as a director and a producer is among the many, many strengths that you have, one of the greatest strengths is that Marin gets shit done. Marin gets shit done. And so we may have had a wish list for all these shots, or we may have wanted to go to all these locations, but at the end of the day, Marin's like, we are making this film. We are pushing through these challenges. So we have to cut this, this, and this in order to get this. Then we're going to do that. And you go over there and you do that. I know that this isn't your role, but can you do this? Like Marin is a really great manager of people and ideas and expectations. And so I think that's a really good combination between us because I have this idea, you know, that starts off over here and Marin says, okay, great. That's great. How do we take this and make it doable? And also insert this artistic idea and these team that I relate to over here in order to make this product.
Nice.
That's the reason I mentioned the dog walking company earlier. It's because I think as people and collaborators, we're finding other skills and experiences from our past have really come into play in running this production company and creating this film. And I know for myself, my day job is as a teaching artist, as an educator. And I would say two of the greatest influences on my writing are working with the playwright Stan and the representatives of the theater company. But the other greatest influence is lesson planning, because kind of unconsciously, I started to structure scripts like I would plan a lesson for students. So like whether it's school or teaching with me or the dog business with you, I think we've really found there are these strengths and skills from our past that have really come together to help us make a really strong way of working.
Yeah. So instead of being collapsed in overwhelm, you guys found slowing down, proper communication, collaboration with others, not being afraid to ask for help or acknowledge spots where there might be weaknesses that need someone else's strengths, right?
Totally. And in this whole process, I mean, we could not have done this film at the level we have if we hadn't just admitted, you know, because this was our first film, and it is not at a large scale. I mean, this is a micro budget, but for us, it's quite large. The caliber of people we were working with was better than we could have ever dreamed. And so being able to, again, put our egos aside and just admit, like, yeah, I don't know how to do this, but we're going to learn and we're going to make it happen. And that's why this film, the process of this film, I think is so special, because of what Matt was saying, is people being willing to teach us and us being willing to just listen and trust, even in these moments of I'm really overwhelmed. I think the funniest story of being overwhelmed was on the first day of filming. We were the last 3 hours. We're at our last location, and we need this specific location because it looks like a cliff and it has this specific look, and we didn't realize it was park property, like state park property, because there were no sites. It's like right off the highway. We're like, whatever, totally fine. And we get stopped. A park ranger sees someone with like a piece of equipment. And so I end up talking to the park ranger, and I'm just like, I'm lying horribly, which usually I'm
sorry,
better.
there's
but I'm just like,
cut out there on my end.
Yeah.
You talk to the park ranger. And then what happened?
And then, so basically he tells us, he shuts it down. He's like, you got to leave. And I'm freaking out.
Because this means the thousands of dollars that we poured into this film up to this point goes to waste, because we need this shot. And we were just told, you have to leave. This is the only place we can get the shot, and you have to leave.
And I was, as far as the producer side, I was the only one there. Matt and our AD were parking cars somewhere else. And AD, our assistant director, Lauren. And so I'm alone trying to lead, half of the team that I have while they're all freaked out about this park ranger. Long story short, another one comes by, and somehow I kind of explained to him oh yeah, we're all good. I talked to the other ranger, totally fine. Don't worry about it. And he's like, okay, great, and drives off. I don't know that he's not coming back, so I'm still panicked, but was very overwhelmed. I felt like I did not know how to proceed because I didn't want to get anyone hurt or in trouble. But we had to get the shot, and so we ended up stealing the shot. It's called stealing the shot. But we were so stressed that whole last couple hours, the whole last few scenes, because we just didn't know if someone was going to come any minute and shut it down, but we did it.
And so when you watch the film and you see the character of Mark, it's this climactic moment where he's getting in this argument with his brother, and this accident happens, and there's terror in his eyes. The listeners and viewers of this can know, actually, that was real terror in Matt's eyes, because he thought the production was being shut down. And so you're trying to talk as fast as possible to get this shot while still being authentic and realistic. So it's a little like this. So the terror in my eyes is authentic, but not for the reason one would think from watching the show.
That's incredible. I can't imagine trying to stay focused when you're just constantly looking over your shoulder, is someone coming?
Well, and that also goes to the collaborators that we were lucky enough to work with. Really stepped up in that moment when Marin said, I need to be here doing this, so can you do this? And you're doing this. And everybody said, yes, I can do that.
There was a certain point where we had to get the cars by a certain time, but we didn't have all the shots. And nobody's in the loop on this except really me and the assistant director who's going to get the cars. And I just say, cool, I'm leaving. You guys got this. I'll be back. And they're like, what? And so I left the actors with our camera team to get the footage, but it was because I trusted them and I knew that they would be able to get it. But when you have your director just leave set, that's unheard of. That's crazy, but it had to be done.
Well, and that's us wearing multiple hats, because you were director, producer, state trooper wrangler.
And would you guys say that was the biggest like hiccup or unforeseen challenge that came up for you?
It was definitely the most stressful for
I
me.
would say in the moment, that was the craziest, most stressful moment, because truly I thought, it's done.
Yeah.
It's done. And I kind of went into this, I don't know. No, I used to be religious. I'm not really religious anymore. But in that moment, I felt like I kind of just had to give it up to the universe, to God, and been like, well, if we're supposed to make this film, we're going to make this film. And if we're not, because we had to be like, let's do this really fast, and we have to be really quiet. But the scene that we're filming is me screaming for help for the character of my brother who's had his accident. So again, when you watch the film, ideally it looks one way, but in reality, what we're doing is this. And we're whispering, but trying to make it look like we're screaming. So it's just like so absurd that you kind of have to just give it over. Trust the collaborators, trust yourself, which I would say is the hardest thing of all. Trust the universe that this is going to work out like it's supposed to work out.
And then, so did you go and like voice over the clip afterwards?
You'll see when the film comes out, it doesn't really matter, because in that moment, another voiceover is happening. So again, things worked out the way they needed to.
Gotcha.
But yes, we did have to grab wilds and like ADR
Just in case.
of the scenes, because we were like next to a waterfall and we were being kind of quiet. So we did have to record it separately.
Cool. And okay. And so what else happened during the production, or was it just smooth sailing after that?
Well, so the way we structured production, and this is kind of where COVID comes into play, because we had planned production back in February, and we were going to film, so that the film flashes back and forth between the past and the present. So the past being these two brothers, able-bodied, hiking in the woods together. The present, we have Caleb, who is locked in, Mark's caring for him, and we kind of piece the story together as we flash back and forth between those. Matt and I were sitting at we were at brunch in Inwood somewhere, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to make these two past and present feel different. And I said, well, we should film it months apart. We should film the first part first, and then take a couple months, or film the past first, take a couple months, film the present. And so pre-COVID, we were going to have, I think, 3 months in between. And the actors were going to like get in really good shape for the past scenes, these young athletic brothers, and then get really out of shape. 3 months of just eating everything and mass builder for the present scenes when they're not as athletic. They're kind of homebodies now. Obviously, Caleb's body would have gone through a significant change. So COVID kind of truncated that 3 months into what ended up being 6 weeks. So part of why the film became so big, so expensive for us, is that we filmed 2 different short films, essentially, because we had to organize all the logistics of filming for the past, and then 6 weeks later, all the logistics of filming for the present. And then in the editing room, we'll piece them together into the story. But that posed a lot of challenges, just because you're organizing the transportation double, you're getting double the food for people. It's just impossible to save money in that way.
Yeah, you're producing 2 films for 1 film. Yeah. That was your idea originally, like filming it in 2 parts. And I think and hope that comes across in the film, because as fun as it was as an actor to gain weight and lose weight and change yourself physically, what we really wanted was the passage of time to be palpable in the film. No matter what we actually looked like, we just felt like having that time in between. We rehearsed a bit. We further developed the script. It gave the other actor and I literal time in between to develop our personal and artistic relationship. And ideally, what happens when you watch the film is you do get really pulled back and forth between these 2 different time periods in the lives of these brothers. And maybe you have a little bit of the whiplash that the character of Mark, which the story is being told from his perspective, has as he is flashing back and forth between the past and the present. So I really got to give you credit for that idea. And that was a challenge too. You keep on asking about challenges, because we had some collaborators say, y'all, it would be much cheaper and simpler if you just filmed both of these in one weekend. And we went back and forth, and we had to say, we know it would be cheaper and simpler that way, but we actually feel pretty strongly, and the other actor, Chris chimed in too with saying, hey, I know this might be an unpopular idea because it's making it more expensive for you, but that's one of the things that I really related to as a performer, is that we were going to have these two different worlds that we were creating in filming, and then combine them at the end, because we think that's going to have a very magical effect.
And I think what he ended up saying was, he's like, I'm having a hard time processing that you're going to compromise story for money. And we were like, wow, that really put it into perspective. And we decided it financially was worth it to us to do the story justice. So we made it twice as big of a project as it needed to be, but we think that'll translate in the end product.
And we realized we can eat ramen for multiple months.
So I want to ask this both to you individually and take a moment to think about this, but what was the biggest lesson that you have learned throughout this process, throughout this journey of coming together, creating this story, all the hurdles? What is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
I could go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
It comes back to the writing and the story for me. And Maren mentioned this a little bit in the beginning. I'll just dig into it more. I began writing out of an impulse of fear after my father passed, not knowing how it would affect my brothers and my relationship. Truly, I mean, my father was a huge part of our family. It was the main way my brother and I were connected to each other.
Right.
And so whether it was about the guilt of have I not been a good brother up to this point, or the fear of do I have the capacity to be more involved and more helpful now that dad is gone, that's where it started out. And I think the biggest lesson I learned is going back to that note from Jody, our DP, of how the brothers took care of each other. I thought this was a story about how one brother took care of another brother. I realized through the development of the story and the producing of this that it's actually about these two brothers taking care of each other, and having this tragic accident give them the opportunity to grow in a way that I don't think they could have without it. And so, like I said, although these stories that I write aren't 100% autobiographical, they both kind of begin and end with the personal. And so it just allowed me to see how much my own relationship with my brother has been strengthened by the loss of my father and us. And I also have an incredible stepmother who is part of this, who I haven't talked about. So my relationship with my stepmother, Evelyn, and my brother, Aaron, has really just been strengthened and expanded and deepened by the loss of my father. And the three of us having to figure out on our own, who do we want to be to each other now? And I think and hope that's present in the DNA of as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Maren?
Yeah, I think biggest lesson I learned, which is always the lesson I'm learning, is how to most effectively collaborate. You know, there were a couple times where Jody, one of our collaborators, was really pushing me to think outside the box on location where we were going to film. And you sometimes want to get frustrated because you're like, well, we just have to do it. We just have to, especially me, I'm such a planner and go-getter and let's just make it happen. But, you know, a specific example of some locations that I thought we would just have to settle for, and the day before filming, our director of photography was saying, no, we need to go find better locations. And we did. And the film is going to be so, so, so beautiful because of her pushing that. And so that's just part of collaboration, is learning when to kind of stifle your impulses and listen to someone. And even if you're like, oh, no, we just need to film where we are, we just need to settle, we just need to do it, and learning to let those other artistic brains and impulses in to enhance the product. And it always does. Every time that you quiet your ego and let someone else have some artistic input, it's always better. And so I'm just always learning that lesson, and I got a crash course in that for sure on the making of Keeper.
Amazing. What advice would you guys give to someone who's on their own climb, you know, not necessarily making a movie, but they're struggling to get through certain challenges in their lives? What would you advise them?
My biggest thing is like, really listen to yourself. And that sounds quite simple, but it's not. It means like taking the space and time to sit in the quiet moments and ask yourself, who do I want to be? What do I want to do? Like, what do I want out of myself and my life, and sitting with those realities, facing difficult truths, and really processing your own potential. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of time to face a lot of those things, but it's growth, it's personal growth, and it will just, listening to yourself will always help your journey.
Yes to that. I guess my piece of advice would be to consume art. Read a book, watch a film, go to a museum. Be kind enough to yourself to remind yourself that you're not alone. Like literally whatever situation that you're in, even being locked in, which we found, like there are other people experiencing that. There are other people with similar or different perspectives on your situation. And the more stories that you can gather to remind yourself that you are not alone in this situation, I have found the stronger you become in facing that personal challenge.
Amazing.
Yeah. Be kind to yourself. I think that's both of what we said. Be kind to yourself is huge.
Because you're awesome.
So now me posing a question to our listeners, what are you going to do now that you've been listening to this? What are you going to do in your life? And what would become possible for you in your life if you overcame your current challenges and roadblocks? So Matt and Marin, where can people reach you? If someone wants to reach out, ask questions about the film, work with you, if they just have questions in general, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so we have our website is oneeyedrabbit.com, one-eyed-rabbit.com.
I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, and then our emails are Marin@oneeyedrabbit.com and Matt@oneeyedrabbit.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook, which I think Jordan has that information. Yeah, reach out.
Okay, I'll put it all in the description for everyone. If you found this podcast beneficial, please consider subscribing and sharing this episode with someone that you know would also benefit from it. That way we can share these messages, these lessons, these learnings, this positivity with more people. See you all next week with another live episode on Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks, Matt and Marin, for being here. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.